everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I'm Jim Robbins. I am the Dean of Academics here at the Institute for World Politics. For those of you who are new to us, IWP is the premier graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs from right here in Washington, D.C. We offer a doctoral program, 7 master's degrees, 18 graduate certificates. If you want more information about our programs, check out our website at iwp.edu. We'd like to thank all of our supporters who make our events program possible. If you'd like to be one of those supporters, you can also check out our website at iwp.edu/donate. It is truly a pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Michael Walsh is a writer, a fiction and nonfiction author, screenwriter, media and music critic, and cultural political consultant. He's the author of more than 19 novels and nonfiction books, a hit Disney movie, and other screenplays. He is the recipient of the 2004 American Book Award for his gangster novel, And All the Saints. And I could list the many publications in which Michael's work has appeared, but it would probably be a shorter list of the places in which he has not appeared. He is a world traveler, a raconteur, and according to AI, former Secretary of Labor. Thank you for all you've done for the Labor Department. AI, they're still working the bugs out. Michael is a longtime friend of IWP, and it's great to have him back to speak about his new book, A Rage to Conquer, a journey through the 12 most important battles in Western history. Please join me in welcoming Michael Walsh.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Dr. Robbins, for that kind introduction, including the Labor Secretary, which I'm very proud of, by the way. Although it was unknown to me prior to logging on to AI the other day. Thanks to this wonderful institution, IWP, where I've been honored to appear on multiple occasions over the past 10 or so years, and I've seen many of you and met many of you here, and thank you all for coming. So today's address will be in several parts, and it's going to be about my book, A Rage to Conquer, which is a sequel to a book I wrote 4 or 5 years ago called Last Stands, which was a surprising success to the publisher anyway, because we sold out all copies of it the first 2 or 3 days it was on sale on Amazon, and had to go back and reprint multiples of thousands more in order to meet the demand. So I'm grateful to the audience that's watching on C-SPAN here, most of whom, of course, I don't know and will never meet personally, but an author's no one without his audience. And so we are always acutely aware that you're out there, that you read, that we hear from you from time to time, and that we're serving a market need for what you're interested in. So thank you to the audience as well. The Rage to Conquer is subtitled 12 Important Battles in Western History. And many of the battles that are not included in there are included in Last Stand. So people will say, well, what about the Battle of Thermopylae? And what about the Battle of Hastings, etc.? They're in the first book, so there was no need to repeat them. But I start this book with a discussion of Carl von Clausewitz, who is the German-Prussian military theoretician of the Napoleonic age. And we'll start part 1 of our talk with Clausewitz. As Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, famously observed, the state of peace among men living side by side is not the natural state. The natural state is one of war. As if to illustrate this point, Kant's East Prussian home of Königsberg is now Kaliningrad, a geographically isolated exclave between Lithuania and Poland, a spoil of war for Russia, being kept both as an ice-free port on the Baltic and a trophy. Someone as substantial as Kant and something as substantial as Prussian civilization vanished. And that city has a new name and isn't even part of the country which now claims to control it. That is Russia. It's isolated and alone. No one could have predicted that. Clausewitz might have. Clausewitz saw firsthand the destruction of the Prussian army by Napoleon at Jena and Austerlitz. That's where he was captured and sent into a very comfortable imprisonment in Paris because of his rank in the Prussian army and his minor nobility of birth. That was in 1806, the year after Napoleon's greatest victory, which is treated in A Rage to Conquer, which is the Battle of Austerlitz. Clausewitz was released, came back to fight again, not for the Prussians, because their army was gone, but for the Russians, and actually fought Napoleon again at Borodino in 1812. So Clausewitz saw Napoleon from both sides and really understood the mechanics of warfare in a way that no one really, prior to some ancient Roman historians, had articulated it the way he did. But Clausewitz is not understandable if you don't know the context in which Clausewitz exists. And this is the primary thing I want you to think about as we talk today. Without cultural context, what you know is meaningless. So what do we need to know about Clausewitz? I'll throw some names at you. Napoleon, Goethe, Beethoven, Byron, Liszt. We can't understand military history if we don't understand cultural history. And it's a mistake we make over and over and over. And I must say, as an American who spent almost half his life abroad, we are especially weak in this regard. Because we live on an island surrounded by thousands and thousands of miles of open water, we tend to think provincially. And as sophisticated as we forced to have become after World War II, we still don't quite understand what Beethoven has to do with Napoleon. And I can explain that in one word: Eroica. The Eroica Symphony, the Symphony No. 3 by Beethoven, is Napoleon. If you don't understand the Eroica Symphony, you don't know a thing about Napoleon. Not a thing. You don't understand what animated the man. You don't understand the motivation. You don't understand his pride. You don't understand his aspirations. You don't understand the fact that in that symphony, Beethoven explodes the boundaries of the symphonic form. He takes what he inherited from Mozart and doubles it in length and says, this is the major statement I'm going to make. And he does it in reaction to and in honor of, at first, Napoleon. So Clausewitz is in the middle of all this. Cultural churning, fermentation. The map of Europe has been shattered. What seemed to be solid is now gone. The Holy Roman Empire falls and comes back as the Confederation of the Rhine. All these things are happening. The European monetary system is now controlled by Napoleon with the continental system. So now England is frozen out. Multiple things are happening. And culture is changing too. In fact, the political situation wouldn't change if it weren't for the cultural changes. So that if I'm addressing people who are in the intelligence community or want to be in the intelligence community, it's not the big things, it's the little things. The little things give you away. The little things tell you what's coming. The little bird that falls over in the coal mine tells you you are in mortal danger. It's a very important principle that I don't think we hit often enough in the way we look at this. As you know, Clausewitz is famous for saying war is politics by other means. Except he didn't say that. It's mistranslation. It's a very easy mistranslation. I don't even know why it's been mistranslated that way. It's just so obvious when you read it in German. He says, der Krieg ist eine bloße Fortsetzung der Politik mit anderen Mitteln, with other means. Therefore, I hear this all the time. War is by other means, meaning that once diplomacy has failed, then and only then do we go to fight. That's not what Clausewitz says. He says, you can fight at any point. At any point. It's just another tool in the diplomatic arsenal. Further, he goes on to say, there is no limiting principle to the amount of force you can use. That is strictly a political decision. So that a commander has everything, as Commander-in-Chief, President Trump has literally everything from the nuclear option down to sending in the Girl Scouts. It's very important to remember that you don't hobble yourself except out of political necessity. Clausewitz says, famously, everything about war is simple, but the simplest things can be very difficult. Im Kriege ist alles einfach. Everything about war is simple. Aber das Einfache, the simplest, höchst schwierig ist, is of the utmost difficulty. Die Hauptsache ist die Schwierigkeit des Ausführung. The main challenge is the execution. We say this in Hollywood all the time. You go in to pitch a movie, as I do from time to time, and the executive will say to you, that sounds great. It's all in the execution. Can you write the script to make that movie that you just described? Can you bring this war machine into being to fight the war you just told me you could fight? In fact, Clausewitz likens warfare to a machine. He says, das Kriegsinstrument gleicht, is very similar to, einer Maschine mit ungeheurer Friktion. A machine with incredible friction built into it. And this concept of friction animates all of his book on war. That is to say, it looks simple, but it ain't so simple. And on those very rare occasions in history, which I've addressed in the new book, Rage to Conquer, where literally everything goes right for the winner, encountering some friction, but everything goes right. We remember those battles because they're so rare. They don't happen very often. Small differences, as I said at the beginning, make all the difference. For example, something you often hear is people and monkeys share 98-point-some% of their genes. I often hear this from our liberal friends. The implication being is, therefore, you're basically a monkey. It's the 2% that's different that makes you human, isn't it? It's the little thing that makes you human. It's not the 98% or 86% or whatever they've decided now. It's the littlest, tiniest thing, that's friction, that makes that machine bump into something, that makes the gear go crazy. It's the smallest difference that makes us different from all the other species with whom we share a great deal of DNA. Small differences make all the difference. Now, as a musician, if I had a piano, I'd play this for you. But unfortunately, we don't have a piano at this point, and I promise I won't sing, so don't worry about that. In music, many of you know music. You have the harmonic system of tonality. Pieces can be in various keys from A to B, C, D, E, F, G, and the flat keys. And when you lay them out on the keyboard and play a chord, say an E major chord, this is what I'll be using for this example, you're going to play E, G sharp, and B. Dong. There's a piece that I like to play in concert called The Vallée d'Obermann, the Valley, Obermann's Valley. It's a novel by a French author named Senancourt, Etienne Pivert de Senancourt. Came out in 1804, Remember this first decade of the 19th century now. Everything happens that's going to matter, happens right now. Out comes this novel. None of you have heard of it, probably. No one's read it. It was immensely popular. And it affected artists very deeply. And one of them that it affected was Franz Liszt, the pianist and composer. So Liszt takes this novel and turns it into a piano piece called Ballet d'Obermann. It's one of his greatest works, and it's the most important piano piece in the 19th century. It changes everything about piano music in the 19th century. Not because it's flashy, it's only flashy in a little bit, but because of its harmony, and particularly because of an E major, E minor chord. There's a famous song, I think it's come from the post-war period, called Every Time We Say Goodbye. And the lyrics, the important lyrics go like this. When you're near, there's such an air of spring about it. I can hear a lark somewhere begin to sing about it. There's no love song finer. But how strange the change from major to minor every time we say goodbye. And what happens is the key changes from, say, E major, which we've been discussing, and it slips down 1/2 step in the third, the interval of the chord, the least important interval in the chord, but also the most important interval in the chord. It's not the foundation. It's not the dominant that's going to leap you back to the tonic. It's that middle thing that makes all the difference. So Liszt, in this piece, Ballet d'Obermann, starts with the key signature of E minor, 1 sharp. So that's either G major or E minor. But in this case, it's kind of E minor. But he doesn't get anywhere near E minor. He starts off and he's already modulated in the first 4 bars. And he ain't never coming back to that until much, much later in the piece. But he's playing with the idea of the difference between the major and the minor. And when the piece finally ends in this big octave run up the piano, it's fun for pianists, show offy. It then ends in what appears to be E major, triumphant E major. This brief pause, and then there's a small 4-bar coda, which resolves not to E major, but to an E augmented chord. So that's E, G sharp, and C instead of B being the dominant note. And then that comes down again to the full E major chord, but this time with the third doubled. Now, this may seem arcane and weird and off point, but it actually, that might be, but it isn't. It's germane. You never double the third. In a final tonic chord on the piano, you very rarely double the third, because the third is the dissonant oddball interval. And it becomes destabilizing if you double it. So when you end this piece, he gives you this final cadence with 2 G sharps in it. And I've always wondered, why does he do that? So easy to leave that lower G sharp out. You have a clean 1-5-1 on the left hand and a clean E major chord on the right hand. He does it precisely because it's destabilizing. Doesn't want you to have a resolution. The whole point of this piece is, who am I? Where am I going? Why am I here? That's the point of Senancour's novel. It's about a young man who wanders into the Swiss Alps in search of himself. It's kind of easily parodied nowadays. I've gone to somewhere to find myself. But in the piece, as Liszt printed it, there are some epigraphs from Senancour's novel. One of them is, Que veux-je? Que suis-je? Que demander à la nature? Who am I? Where am I going? What do I ask? What do I require of nature? Liszt also quotes a line from Byron, who I mentioned earlier, who's just before Liszt chronologically, from Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which was the first poem that made Byron famous. In fact, Byron famously said he went to bed one night, the night Childe Harold appeared the next morning, he was famous. I awoke to find myself famous, who said, because of this poem. So Liszt immediately grabs a hold of that and puts an epigram from Childe Harold into his piece. The connection is clear. The deliberate destabilization, the reference to Byron, who comes immediately before Liszt, and Liszt models himself after Byron. He's handsome, he's charming, no woman can resist him. And with Byron, no page boy or chambermaid could resist him. He was an equal opportunity seducer and notorious for it. They lived flamboyant lives. They didn't need passports. Everybody knew who they were. They were instantly visible, recognizable, and they were both artists. They weren't politicians. They were artists. And they're telling you something is about to happen. So follow the bouncing ball. I mentioned Beethoven's Eroica Symphony. It's an unusual piece. It's in E-flat, which is a heroic key. And it's in 3/4 time, the first movement. First movements are almost never in 3/4 time. They're in 4, basically. So it's a waltz, kinda, although not really when you hear it. But it could be. Well, what else is there that's like this? Mozart's 39th Symphony. At the end of his life, Mozart wrote bang, 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 3 symphonies in a row. They're the greatest symphonies he wrote, 39, 40, and 41. E-flat, G minor, C major. And Mozart's 39th Symphony is in 3/4 time. So Beethoven didn't just pluck this out of his head. He said, oh my goodness, there is this model for me that this man who was the most famous musician in Europe, who's just died young, at age 35, 36, has left this for me to go forward with. So Beethoven takes it and runs with it. And Beethoven dedicates it to Napoleon. And then Napoleon angers the Democrat in Beethoven by declaring himself Emperor of the French. Beethoven tears up the dedication. You can still see it. He crosses it out angrily and says, to the memory of a great man, Napoleon is dead to me. And you know who was in the first audience of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony? Napoleon's soldiers, because they were occupying Vienna. So suddenly history collides again, right in front of your face. It's oral and it's visual. Speaking of Mozart, he wrote a famous opera called The Marriage of Figaro. That was based on a play by Beaumarchais. So we start with the French novel for Liszt's great piano piece. We start with Mozart for Beethoven's breakthrough in the symphonic form. And now we get to The Marriage of Figaro. This brings us back to our opening remarks about what happened to Kant's hometown. The play by Beaumarchais was at first banned. It was shown to the King of France, who said it's too dangerous. It will incite revolutionary feelings in the people. And so he banned it. And the ban lasted 3 years, until 1784, when, in a fit of liberalization, King Louis decided to allow it to be performed. And Mozart picked it up as a libretto from his librettist Lorenzo da Ponte, who was an Italian who later became the first professor of Romance languages at Columbia University in New York City, just to show you that the cue balls in history ricochet off of almost everything. It turned it into an opera called The Marriage of Figaro, Le Mariage de Figaro, or Figaro's Hochzeit in German. And it was done to extraordinary success, made Mozart's reputation really as an opera composer, starts his great run of operas, and it comes out. And in 1789, the Bastille falls. King Louis is executed, and the French Revolution has begun. Because of this play. Yes, there were certainly political malcontents. Yes, there was an undercurrent of this. There was a lot of things going on. But the Mariage de Figaro, the play and the opera, made it okay, as the left likes to say, gave permission for people to say, gee, I don't know about this royalty thing. Gee, it's kind of funny the way the royals in this piece are nasty and horny and liars and cheaters and stealers, and the common working people are good people and they outsmart their bosses, and the Bastille falls. And who's in the Bastille, by the way? Exact contemporary of Mozart, the Marquis de Sade. If you've never connected those two, well, I'm doing that now in my new novel that I'm writing, so I hope to be able to share that with you at some point in the future. We're talking a little bit about structure and form, doubling the third, which I use as a stand-in symbol for friction. Friction. Nothing ever goes right the first time. Helmut von Moltke, the elder von Moltke, is the one to whom it's attributed, no clan survives first contact with the enemy. He's a Prussian field marshal. Well, he found out that was true, because the Prussian army disappears after Jena and Auerstedt. Mike Tyson had a same motto. Everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And then there's Murphy's Law, which is some unnamed Irishman, some unknown Irishman, with the most common Irish name, Murphy. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. That's friction. That best laid plans, mice and men, etc., as our cousins, the Scots, like to say. When writers talk, or when any professionals talk, we don't talk the way you think we do. That is to say, we don't talk about, hey, what are you working on? What's the novel? What's Boy Meets Girl? Oh, that's interesting. What happens? Well, it's this boy and he meets this girl and stuff happens and then they get together. And we don't do that. No. How are you structuring it? Which form are you using? How are you going to present this thing? You have this vast architectural idea for a book, as I do, for example, in this novel that I'm working on. Well, what shape is it going to? What's it look like? Is it bigger than a breadbasket? Is it an elephant? Is it a giraffe? Is it a loaf of bread? What is it? What is it? The saying in the military, as you all know, is amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. Same thing with writers and artists. We don't talk tactics. We talk logistics. How are you going to do that? What form can you handle this form? I want to write an epic poem. Oh, great. You ever done that before? Well, no, but I want to do it. Okay, well, how are you going to do it? Tell me. Well, I'm going to steal from, Homer and Virgil and Tasso and whoever, Melville and Clairol. Okay, great. Make those your models. Those are 4 of the greatest epic poems ever written. Okay, go for it. But we talk technique. Pianists do too. We don't talk interpretation, not that much. We talk about tempos. I argue with my fellow pianists and conductors whose names you would all know about tempo. How fast should this go? Should it slow here? Is there a little retardando here? What about this little stretto part? How are you going to do that? Why did you do it that way? Why did you double the third list? I'd ask him. I was in the room where he died about 4 months ago, and I asked him, but he didn't answer me, unfortunately. But I'd like to know, what's going through your mind? If you look at the Operation Barbarossa, the German assault on its former ally, the Soviet Union, it wasn't the plan that was bad. It was the logistics of the plan that were unworkable. And at any point, Hitler's generals tried to tell him, yeah, it's great. We're going to send the two to Leningrad and this to Moscow and this one down somewhere to get the oil fields or Stalingrad or whatever. But, we have to cross hundreds and thousands of miles of territory. We have no supply lines. Winter's going to come in. I think we can phone our friend Napoleon and ask him about how that worked out for him. We don't have winter uniforms. We don't have the right equipment. So unless the thing is over like the fall of Belgium, i.e. in 20 minutes, you're going to have a problem. So friction set in against the German army right from the start. And they never could figure out a way to compensate for those problems. It's not they weren't good fighters. I talk about the Battle of Stalingrad in Last Stands, 1 million men under arms on both sides, biggest military conflict in history of the world. And it was, as Wellington said, Waterloo, a damned near-run thing. Friction, friction, friction. It gives you up, it gives you away. If you're working in a foreign country and you look like an American, well, you look like an American. If you don't speak the language unaccented, well, you look like an American. They can spot you coming a mile away. If you don't know how many fingers to hold up, like the scene in Inglourious Bastards, you see what happens to them. Bang. Little cultural differences are crucially important. Little idioms, local idioms, is so difficult. Even the simplest thing is difficult. And that's Clausewitz. Now, I've said a lot of nice things about Napoleon. I think Napoleon is the first artist as hero. He's the first novelist to become dictator of the world. He actually was a novelist and wanted to succeed as a novelist, but fate or destiny had other uses for him. And one of the greatest novels ever written, as you all know, is War and Peace by Tolstoy. I almost said Prokofiev, but it's because I'm thinking with my musician's hat on. War and Peace by Tolstoy. And Napoleon comes off terribly in that book. If you've read that book, you'll see that Napoleon is a figure of ridicule on Tolstoy's part. Everything Napoleon does is by luck. And in fact, in the long afterward of this extremely long book, Tolstoy really goes to town on Napoleon. But at one point, when Prince Andrei is going into battle when he's wounded the first time and gets rescued by Napoleon himself, oddly, he thinks these thoughts. He says, ideas which he had long held and often thought about during his military service, that there was no such thing as a science of warfare, and never could be, and therefore there could be no such thing as military genius, struck him now as entirely true and self-evident. And as Tolstoy writes of Napoleon later on, it is chance that determines the personalities of those who rule France at this time in the Napoleonic era. And now they cringe before him. Chance at Austerlitz. Chance determines that all men, and not only the French, but every country in Europe except England, which will have no involvement in the events about to unfold, set aside their former horror and repugnance at his criminality, and now legitimize the power he has acquired, the title he has bestowed on himself, and his ideal concept of greatness and glory, which appeals to everybody as something splendidly reasonable. In other words, for Tolstoy, Napoleon is the beneficiary of friction. Every time he bumps into something, everything goes perfectly well for him. And that his famous military strategic genius at Austerlitz was just pure luck. Now, I don't happen to agree with Tolstoy on this particular matter. And as I said, I see Napoleon as the first romantic hero. Who is he? He's nobody. That's who he is. He's nobody. He's born by accident into a French possession, which was Italian 5 minutes earlier. He's a member of a very, very, very minor Italian family. He don't even speak French good. In fact, he never did learn to speak French particularly well. And yet he became the emperor of the French. How did he do it? Luck? Was it just luck? I don't think so. I think it was sheer willpower. I think Napoleon is a creature of this Senancourt world. Napoleon read Goethe. And in fact, at one point, he invites Goethe, who's living nearby in Weimar, which is a very short distance from Vienna, and calls him in and has a chat with him about Goethe's most famous book up to that point, The Sorrows of Young Werther. And Napoleon asked him questions about the technique and asked him, well, in this part, I think you forced it a little bit. And Goethe says, yeah, you're right. I did. And then Napoleon says, great, but I want to read you what Goethe said about that as they finished the conversation. He then brought the conversation to Werther, which he must have studied in detail. Now, this man has lots to do. Remember, Napoleon doesn't just fight. He invents a whole new legal system. He restructures the French aristocracy. He partly restores the Catholic Church, certainly as a cultural symbol. He's got lots to do. And yet he has read Werther multiple times, but probably in French translation. He mentioned a specific part, and he said to me, "Why did you do that? It's not natural." And he spoke at length on this, and with perfect accuracy. Now remember, Goethe at this point is the most famous man in Europe. He was even more famous than Napoleon, we could argue. Certainly he'd been around longer. And he was highly influential as a poet, as a scholar, as a classical scholar, you name it. Unconventional private life, all of these artists, their personal lives do not stand close inspection. They don't. They don't care, for one thing. Not Napoleon's, not Liszt, not Byron, not Goethe. I listened with a calm face, and I replied with a smile of satisfaction that I didn't know whether anyone had ever made that same criticism, that it's not natural, and that I found it perfectly justified, and that I agreed that one could find fault with this passage's lack of authenticity. Napoleon is talking technique to Goethe, literary technique. The same guy that drew up the plan to fight Austerlitz, in which he stole from the best, Alexander at Gaugamela. What did Alexander do? Oh, that. Okay, I think I'll do the same thing. I don't have flat terrain to work with, but I'll pull the same stunt. I'll pull off to the right, I'll put a poison pawn over there, I'll draw their left flank away, and I'll come right up the middle and kill them. That's what he said. And that's what he did, just like Alexander. But I added, a poet can perhaps be excused for taking refuge in an artifice which is hard to spot. So Goethe's saying, I kind of hope the audience wouldn't notice that part, but Napoleon nails him. And when he wants to produce certain effects that could not be created simply and naturally. So, literary addition. Hey, I like the book better than the movie because the movie did whatever, that. Yes, we do that because we have to put it in within 120 minutes of screen time, and we have lots of formal and technical considerations to do. So we hope to elide naturalness in favor of some well-chosen artifice. The emperor seemed to agree with me. He returned to drama and made some very sensible remarks. Napoleon brought the entire Comédie Française with him to the battlefield because he wanted to show that he wasn't an uncivilized savage to the Germans and the Russians, to whom he felt culturally inferior on some level. As a man who had observed the tragic stage with a great deal of attention, like a criminal judge who felt very deeply how far French theater had strayed from nature and truth, he went on to talk about fatalistic plays, of which he disapproved. Here's a key point. They belonged to the Dark Ages, he felt. Why today do they, authors, keep giving us destiny? He said. Destiny is politics. I conclude Bridge to Conquer with a consideration of the American response to 9/11. And I'll read you a little bit of it. This has become the most controversial part of the book. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. That as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over this globe and about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It is possible that the infusoria under the microscope do the same. That is, the little squiggly things we see think they're living, imagine they're living in this safe and secure world. Yet across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded this earth with an envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. That's the opening of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, in which he's describing the Martians looking at puny, pitiful earthlings and saying, I think I'll get some of that for me. And this was the condition in which the United States found itself at 9/11. We refused to accept a declaration of war in the name of Islam issued by one of the multiple clerics that religion has, and was quite clear in its intentions. And we did nothing about it. None. And our reaction to it was none. And it continues to be none. There's so many things one can say about American futility militarily in the wake of World War II. A Rage to Conquer ends with the three great American commanders during the First and Second World Wars: Pershing, Blackjack Pershing, Nimitz, and Patton. The joke in World War II is our Germans were better than their Germans. Pershing, well, in World War I, too, Pershing was Pershing. Nimitz spoke German until he was a teenager, because he was from Fredericksburg, Texas, which is an entirely German town, was in those days, and only gave it up because of the prejudice against German Americans during World War I. And it wasn't good to speak German in public, so they switched to English. And Patton, you all know about. Patton studied, as you know, the great commanders in the past: Caesar, Alexander, Napoleon. Learned from them. Nimitz loved classical music. He was never without it. Even after Pearl, when the president said, pack your bags for Honolulu, he took his record collection with him. And that's how he relaxed while planning the Battle of Midway, which we just passed the anniversary of the Battle of Midway. Pearl Harbor, December 1941. Midway, May, June 1942. Within 6 months, we had demolished and finished the Imperial Navy. Gone. Bottom of the sea, baby. Gone. The rest of World War II was a mop-up operation. That was thanks to Nimitz's grasp of the cultural and the military demands of the moment. As human beings, we aim to achieve the pinnacle of success. But the pinnacle of success is by definition the end, right? Because you can only go down. From that point on, you're a failure. You have achieved the pinnacle of success. You have found the ineffable, sweet moment that you seek, that Faust seeks, the Faustine bargain. Werde ich zum Augenblick sagen, verweile doch. Du bist so schön, we say this. Stay with this moment. If I could only say for an instant of time, please let this moment endure, and it won't. And it won't. It won't for Faust, and it won't for any of us. But we seek it. We strive to find it. We try to come up with a perfect battle plan. Napoleon does it once at Austerlitz. Even then, it's not easy. Lots of things go wrong, especially on his left flank. Lots of things go wrong. Alexander let Parmenion take a beating in every battle he fought against the Persians, trusting Parmenion to hold long enough for Alexander to throw his right cross at Darius's glass jaw and end it. And what was Parmenion's thanks? He got executed by Alexander later on. But that one peak moment we seek to find. Goethe calls it the eternal feminine. Das ewig weibliche führt uns wieder. The draw of the eternal perfect woman draws us men ever forward. Milton says, has the devil, the serpent, say to Eve, you shall be as gods. Why let him have all the fun? Taste the apple, and you will be as a god. The urge to dominate, built in. The natural state of man, war. The rage to conquer, always there. So I would end with this, just a plea to those in the intelligence community and those warfighters. And I grew up in the Marine Corps, as some of you know. My father just celebrated his 99th birthday. He is one of the last survivors of the Chosin Reservoir of the 2-5 in Korea. Alexander, Aetius, a battle we talk later on in the book, who fought Attila the Hun to a standstill, Napoleon, they all used the same tactics against their enemy, and they won every single time. Caesar, at the siege of Alesia, where he famously circled the wall, that built a wall around himself while he was attacked by a vastly superior army of Celtic warriors, and yet realized that at any point in a siege battle, the guy that can apply the most men to the smallest point of resistance, that friction point, will win that battle. And Caesar did that at Alesia. And so did Bohemond of Taranto at the siege of Antioch, which is critical to the success of the First Crusade. They learn. But that is their moment. It's well to remember this. For want of a horse, the battle was lost. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. So Königsberg is Kaliningrad, and it's not a part of any country anymore, once the greatest intellectual city in Europe. Rome is gone. Constantinople, we just recently observed the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453. Pinnacles, apogees, failure, but always the desire to continue. That doubled third will never leave us. Thank you very much.